author is sort of trying to get to, even with these three chapters. The first chapter really did make sense. It had a point as to what he was talking, and I could make a sense of how it was related to the Indian arts. But the second and the third really seemed very disconnected to me. Not sure how it felt to the others, especially the third chapter. It was just very out of the blue to talk about roof plates, and I'm not really sure of how to make
No,
sense of it.
you're I'm with you in the same boat. I felt like the third chapter was like, why is this even placed here? It was like a
So I
recent
was really
input from.
expecting for a conclusion to say that, this is how it is supposed to be in the Indian arts, and so it really did keep me off track. But even the second chapter to a certain sense, but um, whatever he said in the first chapter really did make me think of what art actually is and how it is related to how it might be related to science and it might not be related to science, how it might be similar to it. All those things really did push me to think about what is imagination, what is innovation, and what is also the point of spirituality in Indian arts, and how much that can push us in the path of Indian art, and how it is different from what is being conceived as art in the West. It really did make me think of that. But the second and third, second to a sort of extent, I understand what he's been saying, but third was, it was as if I jumped into an architecture course out of the blue. That's what it's been till now for me.
Hi everyone, I'm Akshita. I have a similar thought as Shobit Ramesh has, especially when it comes to the second chapter. I have no idea why am I talking about Kokakura Kakuza. Not sure what exactly he's trying to say in his book. I tried to read a couple of paragraphs that he's written about the Asian art, but I just could not relate to it. Same thing holds good with the Upanishads of the Rajput painting. I think I might have to redo a reading of it. But coming to the third chapter, I found it pretty interesting about the Kanika, especially the story of Sudhana, how she managed to get the architecture done. And there is one specific phrase that is spoken in Bodhisattva. I'll just read it out to you. Bodhisattva goes on to expound a parable. The Kanika and rafters are like the king and his ministers and friends. If there is no Kanika, the rafters will not stand. If there are no rafters, there is nothing to support the Kanika. I think what I feel about this specific Kanika architecture is there's a lot of thought process gone behind before they have actually placed that Kanika. And he also mentions that it is not how it is structured. I mean, the place is structured. It's about how the Kanikas are placed. It's not circular. It's how the Kanikas are placed in the circular format. I think these pointers really struck me because I think even as a dancer, before I choreograph anything or learn anything, it is important to understand what is the thought process behind it. I like the clarity behind it. This is one thing that is.
For me, what really struck in the second chapter, and that really got me thinking, especially from a spirituality perspective, which is related in the first chapter's discussion, is the word Buddha of the future, and how, you know, certain aspects of the practice wasn't about the religiosity specifically, but also from a very diverse perspective, because that's when, the way he sits is also kind of a practice when they learn certain aspects of the culture. And I found the mapping between, that's where I found the mapping between why he spoke about the second chapter, between first and second chapter. The other aspect that I found very interesting was the essence of this bronze idol that he talks in the south of India. And absolutely, I watched a documentary. I'm sure most of you would have watched it about the stolen idols that has to be returned, which is on YouTube, and they talk about this Nataraja idol specifically from the rural parts of India where not much we have heard of, but it's so connected to their practice. It's so connected to their way of life and how that's been kind of disturbed. It was not just about stone vigrahams and things like that. It found very interesting to kind of see the connection specifically to Nataraja Vigraham and the context in which he kind of addressed it. And looking at it from today's perspective, where they were talking about the idols being taken away to many museums, where it's kind of put in their museums and said gifted by, but technically it's not that. So there are, I find that quite interesting when I saw this, the documentary versus to what I see. So those are the two points that really influenced me to kind of start thinking of. So yeah, that's my takeaway from the chapter.
Samarthan, can you tell me the name of the short movie, Stolen Idol?
It's on YouTube. I think if you just search Stolen God India, probably to give you one documentary. And it's quite an interesting one. Apparently, there's one which is in Nepal and they have returned it. So that's another interesting thing where they have returned the idea. And these are from villages that probably you wouldn't have heard. Like because they say in Chennai there are 47,000 temples and we do not talk about the Vigrahams and specifically the Nataraja Vigrahams. And they have a lot of the bronze that was made, the way the bronze was made in that is kind of described. That's what gives you authenticity when you look at what proves the authenticity. It's a way how it was. And I don't think they have an answer to how it was. So that's that's a backup way of how they kind of bring in from bottom to the top, how they got the result that it is there. So that's very interesting to watch the documentary, especially, and then look at the chapter that he's actually talking about the bronze part of it. So I found that the architectural part or the making part or the art that's kind of developed with
I think we lost you. I think we lost you. Maybe
Can I just continue or like, yeah. So I have I was going through major confusion when I was reading first chapter. I don't know like how, just I would like to share if and listen if you can also relate to this. Like it's good to understand the spirituality in the art form and the way he has talked about the imagination and the comparison or similarity between science being also in the similar stream and art is also on the same path. But when he talks about bringing realism into art and then he gives example of photographic images, then I was continuously having this question, then isn't like being photographer is it's not art, or that question was coming in my mind, that only it's spirituality comes into the art form, then it becomes real art, or like the question. Like I could relate to few passages very, like, very strongly. I felt like I'm learning something, but this question was, he, uh, you know, holding me back to connect completely. So that was about first chapter. And second chapter, the one para which I could connect like really well, that was where he was talking like to understand art more from the perspective of emotion or feeling than being going into technicalities or how realistic it is, or where he's talking about sculptures and then anatomy and all. More than that, the emotion or expression of the sculpture. So that para I could relate, but first chapter it's still holding me back on connecting to other chapters more. So yeah, I would really like to listen from you also, whether you are also having this, dilemma, whether to connect or how. Yeah.
I had a similar dilemma, you could call it. And extending to, he makes a comment on portraiture also as like a lesser form of art. And even that one that Indian artists did not actually undertake until much later. He makes that point also somewhere in between. In the art of Asia also he talked about, I think the Mughals, when they came and any sign of the art from that period he talks about the ivories from that period. And he says that they can't be considered serious works of art. So that also I had a similar doubt, and I think it adds it's not so as one is the method of how the art form is created. Fine, that it's more direct experience rather than there's no implied or inferred meaning. But it's also like in where that portrait is, right, in what context. Where are you seeing that portrait when you walk around the temple, or whether it's serving a purpose? You need to look at it within the context in which it was found, right? That makes more sense.
Um, um,
I've been coming across. Oh, sorry. Please go.
no, go ahead. I already spoke. Then you can get it.
So I was surprised at all these kind of strong statements that were made in the first chapter, and it's more surprising to see it continuing in the second. So at first, I found it like very abrupt, and then I found it very entertaining to highlight. Aha, he said that, Anotara. But yeah, I'm also in that. I mean, of course, these are his personal views, and now we take a more diplomatic approach to these things when we talk about it. I'm happy to read about these thoughts that he has had and which may have reflected the voice of the general lifetime. So in the second chapter, I really liked reading. Okay, so when I was reading the first chapter, at first I don't know why I thought this. The book is called The Fundamentals of Indian Art, but I expected to read about dance, which was stupid of me. But then in the first chapter, it kind of made sense. It was lovely to see all these different aspects of Indian art all come together, and they're all kind of reflecting the same thing. That was lovely. It was great, and that kind of carries on in the second chapter. So I was able to connect the two, and I think what I really liked about the second chapter is the last paragraph. It says, there can be no manner of doubt that the craftsman took a profound delight in his work, which he regarded as a vocation, and under no other conditions would it have been possible for him to have worked with so much devotion. So that was very nice. That kind of stood out to me. And a question that I had was when they're talking about, oh yeah, the other thing, the Buddha figure stands for the stillness of absolute being, and the dancing Shiva represents the manifestation of the absolute in time. So that was a nice thing. But what I wanted to ask you guys was, in page 22, they're talking about Bodhisattva and their feminine counterparts, the Taras. I've never read a reference to something like this, and I wanted to know if any of you had an idea of what they're talking about. And with the third chapter, yeah, I'm with Shobit on this. There's absolutely no connection. It was very fancy to read about these things and kind of imagine that in my head, but that's it's so useless. At first, I'm imagining a lotus pedestal, and then that pedestal is launching it into the air with like minarets, whatever. So I couldn't connect at all, and I think I'd be very glad if any of you could kind of paint me a picture. But yeah, I'm with Shobit on this one. I could not connect the third one.
Just a point that I want to add, like when we spoke about Kanikas, it's like when I read sculptures, yes, I do want to know the architecture of it, but I want to know what exactly this sculpture is signifying, like Darpana Sundari, like Shukabashini, the Tribhangi. It's a type of dance. It talks about the jewelry, the aesthetics of the costume, the kind of art form. As a dancer, I can relate. Again, coming to Kanika, other than architecture, the clarity behind the architecture, there's nothing else I can relate to as a dancer. Like as Santoshi said, that's also something. Maybe if he had spoken about what did the Kanika portray, what was she trying to say, what was he trying to say in that specific sculpture, maybe it would have resonated to us, is what I feel. It's just a personal thought. Yeah.
Also, the jump between the second chapter to the third was, I think, a little bit difficult to follow the flow. I mean, one second we're talking about the philosophical underpinnings of the art, and then it's just like a very specific structure that we're talking about. So I was waiting for it to go somewhere, like maybe the structure is the basis of all Indian art forms, but it just stopped there. So even I was very confused. So, but yeah. I think it's interesting. What stuck out for me was the line that he said in the second chapter about how we're too occupied with verisimilitude and not capturing the essence of something. And I was thinking that it's a very interesting point. And I was wondering what this may look like in the scale, in like in a large scale, if you're doing a dance production or something like that. How do you make sure that you're not giving up too much for the sake of verisimilitude? So I was just curious, what is your thoughts on that?
What I was all I think it sort of flows through what Madhumita was saying. I think art in itself is very subjective, and what might please someone might not please someone else, and it really depends on someone's experience, I feel, and like what background they come from, or what tradition even they might follow, even in terms of what philosophy their art is for. So I am someone who believes that I don't think, even if I say that I don't like this art, doesn't mean that that art is of any low grade. But I sort of agree with the author in the way he says that there is nothing much innovative, or there is nothing that you add into when you really copy something from what is there in your perceived reality. Like, that's where I join hands with him in the fact that portraiture is pretty scientific in its activity, and it's nothing so different that this person might be adding in. Whereas in something like a Mona Lisa, it's I feel like it's more than a portrait. It's not just a portrait, but it's something that your eyes couldn't see, that his eyes saw, that he painted it. And I think that is his what do I say? That is his contribution to this whole ecosystem of art that made a real difference at that point. So even for a photograph, or a photographer, it really is about having that eye for that photo, which a normal person wouldn't have had. Right. So even a photography, just saying that photography is science is not, I don't think it can be a blank statement which can just be put there. It's definitely an art. I feel the take that you have towards that activity is what makes it. But at the same time, I feel like he is contradicting himself at a lot of points when he says that temple architecture is art, and when he says that there is so much science that is related to making this temple, and then he relates it to the universe and says that all these bricks have a particular position in this whole cosmic whatever, and says that's also part of the art, and how can you not say it's art? I just really don't think of it. I feel like that is a bit scientific to say that this stone or this much is supposed to be this much, and it's supposed to be here. I feel like that's science. There's nothing much. Maybe the design, maybe, I don't know. I feel that's a very tricky space. I feel, what is science, then what is, how much do you bring in laws and rules into art, and how much do you formalize it to say that this is what is art and this is what I regard as art. So in so many places, especially in the first and the second chapter, I felt like he did go here and there. He was swinging a lot of ways in saying that. Even somewhere he made a mention of technique. I think it was when he was talking about the Ajanta case that that it's sophisticated. It cannot be rudimentary is what I think he meant. It's very sophisticated, and it's a result of high practice of technique. So now, do I consider, to take his word, do I consider it as art? Are you saying that it is art, or are you not saying it's art? So it's very dicey, I feel, in that sense. But also the Karnika, I think one more read would sort of help me understand what is the metaphor about, how is it related to the art. Yeah. I think that's what I have to.
It's very interesting, Shobha, that you mentioned about, and also what Amritavali was talking about, like, what was he trying to kind of put in priority list? What was he trying to stack up in order? What was art? What was not art? But I also consider thinking whether for the period that we were talking about, how much of it was considered art at that point? Like, what was art in terms of divisions at that point? Um, we like, I think talking about even the bronze statues that he talked, was it of importance of thinking about how this was made? Was that considered art? Was my question then to start thinking at that point of time. Today in discussion, yes, I'm sorry, am I breaking up? Am I breaking up? Yeah, today. A little bit. Okay. So today in discussion, yes, we kind of go back and look at this, and um, we kind of keep this more closer to our hearts and thinking of the heritage and things that we have kind of to look back and discuss the value of it. Like even the value of bronze of the sculptures. When I was seeing the video, I found it quite interesting because it's not the value that we hear in the West versus to what was kind of put on value in the making at that point. So when I start thinking, is it that the period of time is that making a difference? Like, does the period make what valuing art is, or what is considered in double quotations an art was, an artist is, or does that was it a choice? Was it a way that was taught at that time? Like even for like when you look at Hollywood movies and things, they call the notion of pictures, the cinematography, the movies from a very different perspective. They don't look at it merely as an entertainment, but as a picture, as a motion of arts. So the picture and the way they picture these pictures into a movie is considered art, and the way they describe it, define it, is very different. So then I start thinking that is that perspective of thinking very different at that time? Has that changed, and hence what we read from this perspective is kind of positioning us differently? Is That's just my thought. I'm just kind of thinking on the other side and seeing if is that making difference with time.
I don't know, a lot of thoughts came when you talked about that. I feel it might be really related to how might be a real effort to place all these things, all these subjects hierarchically, especially in India, that you say that science is better than art or humanities or any other thing. I think that's why this compartmentalization which also happened. I would like to think that in older times everything was just based off philosophies, and there were just different types of philosophies, and everything just coexisted, and each had its own importance in the um in the society that another one couldn't replace. That's what I'd like to think, and I really feel like everything feeds into the other. I don't think it's all different. That might be a very utopic idea in today's world, but uh, to a certain extent, I feel that existed in that society long time ago. So yeah, that's what came to my mind right now. And I also feel like patronage and all those things really affected at that point, because no matter what, an artist could make art without having to think about mainly, or without having to stress so much about the food or the income that they had. I think patronage really mattered at that point.
I've sometimes heard this word specifically, like for making of sculptures or making of certain carvings in it. They say kulatur, like it's the part of where the family kind of with the same working practice. I consider using the word there. Probably did it redefine the perspective of an artist in importance with that sculpture. So making a sculpture or making, say, even carving jewelry, for instance, they say, like in Malayalam, they say tattan mare, which is like people who actually make gold or jewelry. So my question is then, are we have we used a different word instead of calling them artists within their own thing? Have they, when they come into the, even during the Rajadasa's period, or period where artists were involved in the courts, did that kind of change the definition at that point, where the importance of that thing was not, I don't know, this is just my thinking aloud, because it's very interesting. Like, jewelry making by itself is a kind of very miniature art by itself. And then there is this word in Malayalam where they say "Kattayam," but then technically it is way beyond just hitting the thing on the goal to make a mala, or like even for our temple jewelries that we all kind of cherish. There is art in it. There is so much of designing, detailing that happens. But then the question is, do we talk about them as artists? Is there a discussion of them as an artist? And has that kind of changed the way we are looking at it from period to period? Is what was coming behind of my head.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to this to that idea of what is a fine art, what is a classical art, what is a craft, the 64 colors, and what is just a like rangoli designing or sculpturing or creating an idol. Like, where is there a line, and should you draw a line, and understanding that. But that third chapter sort of indirectly, I think, talks about it, because while discussing the Kanika, it starts off as what could this object possibly be, right? And one of the things it could have been is a earring, and then he goes on to know the other way that we could look at it is as something that is a part of a house. And then further discussion of, is it serving a function in keeping the gamble and the structure of the house up? And then once he mentions that it is the beginning of leading to dome shaped and half dome shaped architecture, and what followed for the rest of the country. But at the same time, this object, which if you think of it as an earring, you think of it more as ornamentation, right? There's no real function except maybe ornamenting something else that it's a part of. But as the object that's a part of a house, it's serving an actual function. And while it's serving an actual function, you can still derive significance from it. So that Bodhisattva makes that point of the king and the ministers, and that the lady uses the piece of art to sort of, she uses it for her own purpose in a way, like she's able to elevate herself by putting her name and her inscription on it. These are not directly like taken from the text as it is, but I can kind of understand the thoughts in that essay, like all of these different aspects associated with this one object. And so where is its use? How would you place it? Essentially, literally, how would you place it? So yeah.
And now that you said that, I feel like it might have been a commentary on how we perceive art these days, or to say something that it is sectionalized. I feel like most of the issue is just with that we compartmentalize, and we're not okay with ambiguity and saying that this might not be art, this might not be science. I think there's a whole need of doing that. But in that sense, if you say that a space engineer is a scientist, and then say that he's not innovative is not, I don't think it's fair. There will definitely be innovation that's required in that. And to the point made on the jewelry maker, and there also, I feel there are certain rules that you might have to abide by, but there is also a need for innovation in making a new design. And so I feel like it's not too far away from science, it's not too far away from art. And I think we are in the modern society doing a wrong thing to say that this is art, this is science, this is art, this is science, which I feel like is a bit difficult, and it's a bit problematic. Yeah. So when you said about the Kanika part also, that's what I thought, that one thing can mean different things. That it's not compartmentalized. It cannot be said that this is only this. It can have many connotations in different contexts, and it can mean different things for different people. So why not art also can be that? It can be science, sometimes it can be innovation, it can be impressionism, it can be maybe realism also. I'm not too convinced with it, but maybe it can be. And I, I I think we should just be okay with it, of whatever people do. If it's coming from a space of openness and trueness or honesty, I think it should be called whatever they should be deeming it to be called. I guess, I don't know.
I think there is a total amalgamation nowadays within the research as well with all these subjects, be it science and dance, be it music and science, be it health and dance as well. Like there are a lot of people who kind of take work for autism or children with certain difficulties in their learning aspects. There is both physiotherapy and psychotherapy approaches. And I feel that it is a shake hand kind of a thing. Okay, am I audible? Okay, great. I just feel like now, today, with this current research and generation that we are in, I mean, fortunate are we that we see different subjects coming together and appreciating of different perspectives and angles, especially with science. And then it becomes like everything is an art within different subjects that we speak in. So I think that's what Shobit was talking about. I think that kind of really relates to look at different researches that's happening. Like I happened to read a research which is about autism and brain mapping within the perspective. It's quite interesting to see how it's kind of communicated beyond just looking at it from a movement therapy. So it was not about movements alone, but it was much more of psychotherapy. But for using and finding art within what they were talking about. So it's quite an interesting conversations, at least now in research that we see with what if you look back to finding signs or finding art in every subject or what it the same. I think it's quite interesting to see today's conversations going a bit more broader with perspectives.
What
I
Shobit
don't
said
know.
is making
Sorry.
me think. Sorry.
Go ahead. There's not. Please go ahead. It was a totally different topic.
Okay.
Please go
So
ahead.
nothing. It's just that what Shobit said is kind of making me think. So you have art, you have science, and there are very basic. At least this is what I've seen in like management textbooks, right? Is management an art? 8 points. Is management a science? 8 points. I think you're very right. I feel like trying to compartmentalize this, and then the answer is always it's both. Because I don't know. So I think you're right. Trying to compartmentalize kind of shuts you off at one point. There is a barrier that you're not allowed to cross. But now it's making me think whether it is music or dance, at least now, it could have been different in the time that this book was written. Now I think we're more interested in identifying, oh, this is what I'm doing in the creative process, and it's all right. But maybe back then, it was more along the we have these discussions in dance also a lot, right? Like the Nati Dharmi, Loka Dharmi, what is classical dance, what is folk dance. So it could be where it is now we have a very open mind and we are ready to accept that this is outside of my form, or maybe this is different from what I've been taught, or this is something that my body is not used to doing, but we are still willing to accept. And that's what adds that creativity or the uniqueness of it or the USP or whatever it is that you're trying to call it. It makes you different and it makes it special. And now I feel we have the openness, we have the exposure to admit that, to accept that. Like you said, if it's honest and if it has the effort in it, I think you should just accept it. I'm in complete agreement with that. But maybe at that time, this might have been something that they were kind of policed against. Maybe just a guess. Maybe they're not allowed to think that it's okay. Classical has to remain classical and folk has to remain folk. Maybe. I'm just kind of observing that this is how much we've come. This is how far we've come. I have no idea when the book was written, but this is how far we've come. is the thought.
There is something I just want to ask all of you. While I was reading the second chapter, yes, like I could not understand what is the core of it. Like he's talking about the Upanishads. Then we're suddenly moving to the Vaishnava sculpture and then Jainism, Rajput, paintings. And then suddenly we talk about Mughals and we end with Abindranath and Gangendranath. You know, what do you think was the core of the second one? Something that I could not figure out. If if you guys can throw some light on these.
I personally feel like the first two chapters are like a nice bird's eye view of Indian art, rather than to kind of connect different pieces. I felt like it was just some very good examples of what we're doing, and not as maybe like a historical account or anything to connect. That's how I felt while reading it, especially because he brought the contemporary. Might have been just a bunch of examples. That's what I felt.
And the order is roughly chronological. The intention was to go from past to present, roughly. So that much is there. Yeah.
Any other pointers you guys want to discuss about these two chapters?
And actually, I think what showed
Sorry, I think
philosophies is what shared by earlier. That is very evident in the first chapter, because they're talking about different aspects of study, different philosophies might have inspired. Second feels more like
I don't know, I lost you, Santosh. Could you please repeat again?
sorry. I was just saying in the first chapter, I think they're talking about how different philosophies would have influenced Indian art. And the second, more a string of examples, like what Shobit was saying, like he believes that there were a bunch of philosophies that coexisted harmoniously. I feel like the first chapter was more a portrayal of that, how the so many different aspects could have influenced and how they could have influenced. And the second, more tangible examples. This is what has happened. What I
how do you guys feel with the choice of words sometimes he played around with? Like, I found it very interesting when he used the word, when he adjectified Shiva word with terrible. Did you guys notice that? Like, there was, I think it was somewhere in the second chapter. It was quite interesting, like how I've heard destruction, I've heard dissolution, but then I was like, okay, that's like so cool to kind of put that at that point of time that he's written. Um, I found it a choice of words. I'm quite interested to see why he chose certain words. Well, in a couple of instances, I think there's something also in the first chapter. The second chapter, he kind of uses that word.
I kind of felt like this was very much aimed for the Western audience. So, whatever they might, I've read this kind of thing in some other text. I'm not able to remember which ones, but a very similar tone is taken in a few other textbooks where they don't want to describe exactly what if we know Shiva as the destroyer or maybe the Lord of Dance and all those things, but they don't take that route at all. They kind of describe it in a way that someone who is completely unexposed to Indian thought might be able to relate, is what I felt. And I noticed that too, and I found it funny. But yeah, this kind of seems to be a continuing tradition. I don't know. But yeah, it was funny. I'm glad you pointed it out. Oh yeah, and speaking of the deities, does anyone have any references on the Tara as the feminine counterpart of the Bodhisattva? No one? Because I was really curious. I've never heard of this. Maybe I can read about it next class. Next session. If anyone has any references, please do share.
Also, it is like it's only told in that last line about the feminine counterparts. Like nowhere in the paragraph they are actually attributing anything to a feminine counterpart. Like how you are perplexed, even I am. Like why are they even mentioning this? You know.
It's a lot of references, and I think without background, it's a lot, because before this book, I never thought about looking at an artwork. I just was never inclined in that direction. Now, being put in that spot, everything looks different. And I don't have enough background for it, so it's difficult to process also.
What I really felt interesting in the second chapter, which I was talking about, is the perspective in which they spoke about, which he kind of told Buddha for future. I found that sentence quite a futuristic approach to how Buddhism was perceived or is perceived. And I can't say was perceived specifically for that sentence. I would say is perceived, because I found that like he was discussing about the root cause of it even being a position of Buddha, being very meditative. So he was trying to, I think the words that were put, the tense that he put for specifically for that sentence, I was quite intrigued by the way he kind of articulate. Now, that's why I couldn't say it as past tense, where I felt like it's an ongoing process. But the rest in discussion, I felt the tenses that he chose were precisely not something that I felt continuous. Like I felt that there were choices of past and just present, but then present from his perspective of writing, but nothing felt continuous. But then the word future was quite used when he was discussing the present, which is very interesting to see how he looked at it. And apparently there is, I think there is one paper, I'll try and share it. It's about the seat position of Buddha, which had a reference to what he was talking and how it's kind of then practiced and taught. And then that being the first fundamental approach for them to kind of learn about the point of becoming.
Um, I think not able to hear her, right? Can I continue? I was just thinking in terms of what he means by ideal art. It's a term that he's used quite a few times in the first chapter, I feel. And with respect to that, he was talking about how for an artist it is about outlining a picture or a vision that he's had in his mind. So where does detail and technique really fall into this is something that I was really thinking about. And for us dancers, especially for us Bharatanatyam dancers, when we focus so much on technique, and I feel at places he's really told that technique is something that will really ruin your innovation and inspiration and all that imagination that's supposed to come your way, and that will lead you to the actual purpose of Indian art, which is spiritualism and whatnot. Do you think that there's supposed to be a balance? Do you think that it's something that can be taken off and it's just supposed to come, or do you feel it is because that we are being so like peculiar about it, being so like keen on maintaining a technique that we might really lose inspiration later? I don't know if we'll lose inspiration if we focus too much on technique, but this is something that I thought I really wanted to know what you guys think about this.
Could you just repeat that again? I'm sorry, Shobit.
Just whether technique is something that will really take out the art of art out of dance, whether it'll make something very scientific and logical and
I had a whole new identity crisis after reading that. I think that's what he intended because you're so focused on the technique and complete invalidation. Like you're useless if that's what you do, and then what will we do? But I think this is something that is very. I'm so happy that it has been discussed so much in the pandemic, especially. So many people and I think I subscribe to their views. They would have.
I think your mic is covered at some places.
Oh, sorry. Is this better now?
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, a lot of gurus were discussing this, and I think I subscribed to their views when they were saying technique goes a certain way. And after that, you have I think it was Rukmini Vijay Kumar ma'am who had said this. I'm not sure. But she said after a point of time, technique becomes so ingrained that you have how do I put this? Creativity becomes very natural. As in, you don't find your thoughts and your form to be at odds with each other. It flows. So you've been wielding your instrument so well that it's not you. I mean, you don't have to put effort into communicating it or making your dance communicate something or your music. Essentially, it's just that technique helps you achieve what you want. But at the end, it's and I'm so sorry, I'm messing up a lot of these things, but kind of like how okay, give me a second. I'll tell you, I'll kind of give you an idea of what I kind of assimilated from all these things. But the point being that technique goes only a certain way, and then after that you kind of forget about it. Or rather you don't hold yourself to that higher standard with technique, and you start holding that higher standard with your voice. Yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to say. I think that kind of helps. So you kind of start learning a language, you learn the words, you learn the script, and you learn sentence structure, and then you decide what to write. And after a while, your voice becomes so powerful that grammatical errors are just entirely forgivable. If that, that's kind of what I told to console myself. Because at one point of time, I think he says something like this one thing where he says the people who practice technique to the point of perfection, by the time they've attained that perfection, they're so old that there is no creativity anymore. So that's what I think. After a certain point of time, you kind of let yourself do what you want to do. Yes.
This makes, I think, a lot of sense on one point where I'm like, if you had to say something that's different between science and art, then it would be something linked to what Santoshi just said. So when you said that the focus starts becoming your voice, that makes sense when there is something to be communicated. So it's like, as long as that intention or the rasa is communicated, then if the grammar also went out of place, the audience or maybe both of you would not enter the consciousness. Like, it's not something that you would take notice of because that communication has happened. But when you come to illustration in science or mathematical models which are beautiful, or whatever else you want to say is scientific and not art, it's very hard to pinpoint maybe like what was that exact intention of that object or the creation. Or like we just discussed, that the beam that's holding the rafter, like it's supporting the house. Like, what is the intention beyond supporting the house? Like, is it trying to communicate something more? Does it depend? Should someone have put it there with intending to communicate something, and then it becomes artistic work, or like, so that's the one point. Yeah.
Okay. Just to add on to all that, if you say that so much is technique, then where do you put in growth and development as an artist then? Like, do you feel that you figure out a technique and it's just going to be that for the rest of your life? Is that what do you guys think? and is then in that sense, if technique is constant, if it's something that you figure out maybe by 30s or 40s, and then just reeling out pieces and creativity stuff is what would be growth and development then if technique is constant. I generally feel like technique can change. It is a variable in an artist's journey. I feel it's not something, and it's something that someone has to keep working. I don't think it's something that's figured out and you keep it aside and you go along with it. I feel it's something that has to be informed by your experience. It's something, whatever comes your way. And it is, I feel it's very wrong for someone to say that this is the only path that I'll do and this is what I'll stick to. Especially for an artist, when you're supposed to inform whatever is happening, let your art inform whatever is happening around you. I don't think that technique, and I feel technique is definitely a part of art. It's not devoid. Like we cannot see art without technique. But I feel that also should be a variable, and it should be flexible, and it should be something that changes as our life goes ahead and whatever things that we believe in. Because it's not just about taking hands and keeping. It's much more than that. I feel technique that's a very basic form of looking at technique. I feel. But even that, I feel most of the times when I look at a simple raga, the same raga, 2 songs, I might move differently completely to both of them. In the same step, I might look at it differently. I feel really depends on what context and all those things. And even coming back to that, the chapter of Karnika, I feel that informs a lot on what we are discussing right now that we have started discussing about it. Like out of the blue, it started making much more sense. I would really like to go and read it again, actually. But yeah, that the same thing can be different things, right? And it can change over time for the same person. It might not change over time for the same person. Flexibility is what is. Adaptability is what is. Yeah, adaptability is what it is.
To add to what you said, Shobit, like, yeah, technique is important, but you, as a dancer, just after you learn the technique, it is about how you explore. Like, for example, basic Natadavu we know, and we know that 8 things, but now I've learned the technique perfectly, but can I explore further? It's basically exploring that one specific adavu, the pin drop of it. Like, can I move Natadavu towards the diagonal, like this diagonal instead of this diagonal? My right leg go to this. It's basically exploring. I feel after we have mastered the technique or have some hands on the technique, I think it is exploring. The moment you start exploring, your basic is strong and technique becomes dynamic there. That's what I feel as an artist. Like it becomes dynamic as we explore. It grows along. It goes hand in hand, like a railway track. Like exploration goes this way, technique goes hand in hand, and it changes as we explore it. The base remains the same. That's what I feel.
I think in the
I
time
think
that you're still working on your technique, no?
I think network issue. We have like 2.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. I was just saying, while you're still in the process of perfecting your technique, I feel like the growth and development, as in you maybe read up on things, watch other people dance, you learn by observation, learn by inquiry, so that at a later stage you can choose what you performance in our example maybe, and until it's you're just taking inputs. Am I audible?
I think we lost her. Could we just wait? We are left with another minute. Or can we like wrap?
I think I just feel like there is one sentence that I felt which connected me to what I'm not sure if Saraswati Amma told or Rukmani Amma told. I'm not able to reference it back, but there's one sentence that says, "Learn the technique and then forget the technique." it's quite perspective oriented. And how we position it is again subjective. You learn the technique, then you forget the technique. Now, this forgetting the technique is quite a big word. It's still subjective. I'll come back on who told it, but I'm sure it's one among them both, if my reference is correct. So it's either Bal Saraswati Amma or Rukmini Dev, Arun Dev. I'm not completely sure of that reference. But yes, there's a sentence that says, you learn the technique in such a way that you forget it and then dance. Like you completely forget it. Now, that forgetting is when your body is kind of completely observant within the essence of the technique, and then you're able to adapt to everything else that your body is like how Shobit also mentioned about raga can kind of create a different a same raga can kind of create a different emotion within a certain context, and the way we kind of position our body within that movement. Like a same Natya would be done very slowly when probably listening to another raga, but done very crisp and with speed orientation when done with another. I think it's about the beauty within different perspectives falling in and then being able to forget that movement and just belong where it's kind of inviting us. So I think that sentence is opened up to so many perspectives, and it's very interesting that should we sum it up, guys, and then maybe we can come back the next week. But it was really nice. It was a lovely discussion, and hour just passed, and it's beautiful to kind of talk about things that are so new to us, and maybe talk about Coomaraswamy's perspectives from different dimensions. But yeah, it was really nice. Thank you so much, and we look forward to the next session again.